Well, hi everyone. Here we are, Tuesday, the 19th of November, Club Grubbery time back again. And we've got a really great interview coming up today, which is going to enlighten all of us. Johnny Larder, great to see you back on again, mate.
Great to be here, mate, and yes, another enlightening guest.
Indeed, an enlightening guest. And it's been a big weekend in Melbourne for me. It was a great gathering of people, but we'll talk about that on another episode because we have an incredible lady joining us from Arkansas in the United States, and she's graciously given us her time. We're talking today to Marcella Piper-Terry, who has been an activist in the vaccination space for just over 20 years. Has worked extensively in this area. We've come to know Marcella through Anita Huffmeister and Meryl Dorey through the Australian Vaccine Risk Network. So, Marcella, great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Graham. It's wonderful to be with you.
Right, so let's unpack your story because at the moment, I'll give you an idea where we're at in Australia. There is, since the election in the United States and the nomination of RFK, and it looks like Asim Malhotra to enter into the space of sorting out health in the US, there seems to be a real upsurge of energy in Australia in the hope that what's happening over there will trickle down here, at least that it will put a little bit of spark into our politicians and get them to have another look at things, because everything that happens in America seems to drift down to Australia. So this interview will be much watched and much shared, we hope. So, but we have been heavily involved in this space, John and I, with the Australian Vaccine Risk Network and other organisations, trying to seek some kind of medical justice and end the medical tyranny in Australia, which has been horrendous. While we have been fighting these things for 3.5 to 4 years since the COVID pandemic, of course, people like yourself and Meryl Dorey and Anita have been fighting this for 3 decades, 2 to 3 decades. And we're starting to see a lot of the people involved in these networks build up a little hope because they're now getting the attention they should have got 30 years ago. So we thank you for coming on and just ask if you could just unpack your story for us a little bit, your background and what you've been up to.
Okay. Well, I was initially, my background, my educational background, I have a Master of Science degree in psychology, and I took a dual track in clinical psychology and experimental psychology. And I love research. I was very much, I was a research assistant during my graduate training, and love statistics and love the experimental method and true science. My goal was to be a clinical researcher, and my ultimate goal was to be a scientist at the CDC, because I thought at that time that that's where all the brightest the minds were and the best scientists, and I just that was like my mecca. So my goal was to be a scientist at the CDC. I had finished my master's degree, and I was accepted and was in a program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., with a full ride. I had a full scholarship and had a teaching assistantship and was paired with the researcher in my field, which was the premier researcher in my field, which was in health behaviors. So it was about my research, my master's level research, for which I won a national award, was about risk behavior and applying how we view health behaviors and how we assess the risk benefit analysis and how we make decisions about our health. And so that was my background. And then at the time when I was just beginning in the PhD program at George Washington University, my daughter was just going into kindergarten. And so she got her kindergarten vaccines because I was, I was very much socialized to believe that doctors knew everything, not everything, but certainly knew more than I did. And so I didn't question. And I had previously had multiple miscarriages and had blood clots and a DVT, which I didn't really relate to the flu shot that I got the week before until much, much later. But at the time when my daughter was in kindergarten, and she got her kindergarten vaccines, she had bad reactions, and she developed OCD behaviors and tics, and was ultimately diagnosed on the autism spectrum with Asperger's syndrome, which is now termed high functioning autism. And but I still wasn't putting two and two together, because I think my education and my background really prevented me from even looking. I was so brainwashed. And so it wasn't until after that happened, I ended up dropping out of the PhD program, because I needed to be home to take care of her. She started having seizures and developed a seizure disorder as well. So it was a lot, and there was just no way for me to be a full-time PhD student with a teaching assistantship. So I ended up leaving the PhD program and being at home, and I went to work in a neuropsychology private practice in Washington, D.C., and started doing evaluations and assessments of children diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And I had the opportunity to evaluate a child who had known lead exposure. Her father was an ambassador to Egypt, and they were situated downwind from a battery smelting factory. And so I learned a lot about lead poisoning. And so when I started looking at autism, and I started looking at these kids that I was evaluating, and then after we moved to Indiana, I was working as a school psychologist in a preschool program, and I was looking at the environment and the heavy metals in the environment. And I was working in a neuropsych / holistic psychiatry practice. And I went to my first DAN conference. And DAN, for those who don't know, was Defeat Autism Now. And it was a research think tank, doctors and scientists from around the world who were looking at the most recent work around the world on autism and the causes of autism, and healing the medical sequelae of vaccinations, largely vaccinations. And as I was walking around, I was like, these people are really, they need to be paying more attention to lead, because this is heavy metal toxicity, and they're making too much about the vaccines. Well, then I started looking at epigenetics and hearing from scientists like Martha Herbert about epigenetics and the interaction of genetics and the environment. And, bells started going off in my head, and I really just got hooked on the research. And we stopped vaccinating my daughter, and we started applying the biomedical interventions from Defeat Autism Now program, dietary changes and supplements and that kind of thing. And she got a lot better. She ultimately lost her autism diagnosis, as many children have done. But she was doing really, really well. And then she got bit by a brown recluse spider, and she went through 3 rounds of antibiotics, and the antibiotics weren't working. And I got fear-mongered and bullied into giving her what I thought was a tetanus shot. And I didn't know at the time that there were no more tetanus shots, just tetanus shots. And it was a Tdap, and it had 330 micrograms of aluminum, and it was cultured on cow's milk protein. And cow's milk protein, caseamino acid, is in multiple vaccines that are given to our children, but my daughter has a cow's milk allergy. And so when you take that cow's milk protein and you combine it with an aluminum adjuvant, she had a severe reaction 3 hours later. She was 15 years old, and she had a Tdap, the vaccine. And 3 hours later, she had a grand mal seizure and stopped breathing, and her eyes rolled back in her head as I was holding her head in my hands. And had we not lived in a very small town, and had my neighbor across the street not been home — my neighbor was an EMT, he was a paramedic, and he was home, and he had his police scanner on, so he heard the 911 call. And when my other daughter called 911, and he was through our front door, up the stairs, and working on her within a minute of the 911 call. And he worked on reviving her until the ambulance got there. and she was revived. And we went to the hospital, and I called. I already knew, I didn't want to do it. And that voice in my head was, no, what if, but there was also that other voice in my head, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? And what if, what I know now is that tetanus doesn't come from spider bites, and I was lied to, and my doctor didn't know anything about the vaccines he was administering. He knew she had a milk allergy, but he didn't know what was in the shot because he'd never read the insert. And so she was ultimately diagnosed with a primary immune deficiency syndrome, which is still affecting her health. She's 30 now, and still has seizure disorder and health issues. But what happened after that was 1 year later, we were living in Indiana, and 1 year later, the Indiana legislature made a new requirement for vaccines, and they were requiring the Tdap vaccine for all children going into middle school. And I saw that announcement on the front page of the newspaper. And Indiana has religious exemptions to vaccination. They have a law in the United States. Laws about vaccines are on the state level. They're not federal, they're by the state. And some states have all states have medical exemptions, which are really hard to get, and can be overturned without the public health ever seeing your child or seeing reviewing their records. Some states have religious exemptions, and fewer states still have philosophical exemptions. And Indiana had religious exemptions. So, but there was nothing in the newspaper article about the fact that parents could opt out. And so I got into a battle with the city editor of the newspaper in Indiana, in Evansville, Indiana, trying to get them to issue a follow-up story just saying that parents, could exercise their right to religious exemption, and they absolutely refused. So I went to my Facebook friends and asked for people to donate to put up a billboard. And I had friends donate, and friends from all over the world who were donating. And we put up a billboard in Evansville, 2 billboards in Evansville for 9 days. It said, "No shots, no school, not true." And they made me put my name on it because this is controversial. And, if somebody complains, we have to know who to complain to. So my name was on it, and it said, paid for by Marcella Piper-Terry and parents of vaccine injured children. And a week after that billboard went up, I had a couple of people through Facebook contact me, and they had a web hosting company, and they said, we would like to help you put up a website. And we formed a nonprofit, and we put up the website. And I had been writing about vaccines, researching and writing, and I had a blog, and I had a lot of Facebook notes, and we started populating the website. It was vaxtruth.org. It was a nonprofit, and we started raising money for billboards, and we put up billboards in multiple states, informing parents about their rights to opt out of vaccines, because that's something nobody ever hears. All you hear is your kids have to have them or they can't go to school, and parents are lied to, and they don't know what their rights are. So that was the real mission of Vax Truth, was to educate and empower parents to make informed decisions, and not to make decisions snap decisions based on, having a gun to your head. If you're a parent, a single parent, and you're working and your kids have to go to school, that's like having a gun to your head. We're going to send your kids home. You're not going to be able to work. And they just don't tell them that they have the right to say no. So that's how it started.
John, in Australia, we've seen the persecution of so many people who've been fighting against vaccines for the last 3 decades. I mean, persecuted beyond understanding the level of vitriol and gaslighting that's gone on. And we saw that when we attended the 30th anniversary of the AVM on the Gold Coast. How much pushback have you had from the authorities, from the media, and from the community at large in these campaigns that you've been running over there?
I actually have probably not been as attacked as many other people have because of my background and because of my education. And as a master's level student, I received one of 10 national awards for excellence in academic research. So I was a researcher and was recognized for my research abilities before I turned my lens on vaccines. So that has helped. But it's been, there's a lot of trolls. There are a lot of people who, call me a baby killer, or, think I'm going to bring back polio and smallpox, and, the same sound bites that everybody hears. I've lost a lot of friends, lost a lot of family. When I see Bobby Kennedy talking about, his family and in the news, and his family turning against him, I have siblings that are in the medical field, and they just think I'm dangerous. And COVID, it was bad before COVID, and after COVID, it's been much, much worse. It's a lonely place to be, especially when it's so difficult to reach the ones you love the most. But as far as, pushback from the government, I have not felt it so much personally. I mean, I think the more our numbers grow, the greater the pushback is. One thing that did happen was, to me, was the first time that I actually went and spoke with my senator, state senator. They had sailed through. There was a bill that was sailing through the legislature, and it went completely unopposed in the Senate and was headed for the House. And it was a bill to mandate all workers in hospital clinic settings, regardless of whether you're parking cars or serving coffee or working in an office and have no patient contact. It didn't matter. Or if you were a contractor, like a plumber, you have to go into the hospital and work on the toilets in the hospital or the sewer system in the hospital. You had to be fully up to date with the Tdap vaccine, yearly flu shots, the MMR vaccine, and the chickenpox vaccine. And they were going to mandate this, and it just sailed through. And I went to I stayed out of the legislative arena for a long time because I just I felt like science was my realm. I could give them the information that they needed, but that was not my thing. But the first time I went and talked with my senator, in 5 minutes, he was in tears. And he said, I didn't know any of this. I was talking to him about aborted fetal tissue. He was very, very pro-life, and telling him about the aborted fetal tissue and the MMR and the vaccine, and the chickenpox vaccine. And he was extremely upset. And he said, you're the first person who's ever talked to me about this. He said, for every legislator on at the State House, there are 2 pharma lobbyists assigned for every legislator. And so if I don't hear from you, and people like you, he's telling me, if I don't hear from you, that's all I hear. So I became pretty active legislatively, and I hated every minute of it. It's a very dark place to be. The energy at the State House is just, it's dark. And but we successfully defeated that bill, and the way we did it was really interesting, because that same legislative session, they had passed a bill called it was HB 1337, and they called it the abortion bill. And Indiana is a very pro-life state, and so HB 1337 was introduced by these 2 lady legislators, one in the House and one in the Senate. And they made it a level 5 felony to transport, receive, sell, or acquire in any way any remains from abortion, tissues, organs, anything from abortion. And that bill sailed through. And then they turned around and they tried to mandate everyone to get the MMR vaccine and the chickenpox vaccine. And I just stood up there and I asked them, I said, do you realize, Senator and Representative, do you realize that if SB 162 passes, you're going to make every healthcare provider in the state of Indiana a felon? It's such hypocrisy. It's just complete hypocrisy. And so it did not pass. And I was very grateful for that. But It, you know, it's a fight, and it takes so much time away from family and so much time away from the things that we want to do. But it really is a calling. I think for me, anytime I feel like I'm going to quit, God just reminds me that, oh no, you're not. and I'm reminded that, if things hadn't happened the way that they had, I would be at the CDC and I would be part of the problem. And so as horrible as it has all been to live the life of vaccine injury, I'm grateful in some ways, because I've met some amazing people. Some of the most, we say in the movement, these are the most amazing people I wish I'd never had to meet. But it's and it is a calling. It's something that I know will still be here when I'm gone. The work will still be here.
Marcella, there's been a real reckoning over the past probably 15 years about mental health, especially in Australia. A real recognition that mental health is as real as any other broken bone or illness.
Absolutely.
Why do you think they've not allowed that to play part in somebody's genuine medical reason for not wanting a vaccine? The fear, for whatever reason, of not wanting to take a vaccine to remain at work or to go about their normal business. Why has that not been allowed to be an exemption? Why do you have to have an anaphylaxis to be exempted?
Well, that's a very good question, and I know I think there are two parts of that I would want to address. First of all, they can't allow someone's fears to trump what they say is evidence-based science, which is not evidence-based science. It is science that has been bought and paid for by the people who benefit from the sale of vaccines. And, I know probably everybody watching this show knows that the childhood schedule has not been studied. The way that vaccines are given at any of the well baby or well child checkups in the combinations that they're given has never been studied for safety or efficacy or interactions between ingredients, or interactions between the vaccines and the child themselves. So I think in the United States, John, what has happened is that there has been a push to say that anyone who has a fear of vaccines is mentally ill. It is a mental illness to have a fear of the vaccines. And so, which is really interesting, because there are studies, and there's one in particular, I can't cite it off the top of my head, but there's a study that was done, I think in 2011 or 2012, that looked at the onset of new psychiatric diagnoses temporally associated with the administration of vaccines in adolescence, in children middle school age. And they found statistically significant increases in anorexia and OCD and Tourette's syndrome from vaccines given to teenagers. And which is, in the mental health realm, the mental health diagnosis that carries the highest death rate is anorexia. So, it's mental health, as you said, there has always been this stigma about mental health. And one of the things, I'm glad you asked that, and I'm glad you brought that up, John, because there really is. I mean, there's nothing separating this part of us from the rest of us. It's our brain and our body are connected. And, you hear people talk about mind body. And for me, it's not just mind body, it's mind body spirit. And it's all together. And it is what makes us human. It is what makes us a part of the divine, a part of our creation and makes us creators of our own destiny. And when we are assaulted with neurological toxins that target our neurological system and our immune system, it throws a big monkey wrench in that whole thing, in that mind, body, spirit connection. Because, when you're in terrible pain all the time, it's hard to be spiritual. It's hard to be healthy on a mental level. So many of the things that are in vaccines, they target the gut, and people talk about the brain being the kind of the switchboard, the major center for everything that goes on in the body. But that's actually not true. It's the brain is downstream from the gut. So what happens in the gut affects the brain. And we need to really think about what we're doing and how many of our children have horrific, and adults too, gastrointestinal problems. I worked for a while as a pain management therapist, and I was working with people who had chronic pain syndromes and cancers and horrible diagnoses. And when we would do the medical timeline and then the medical history, a really in-depth medical and health history, without exception, it was always something that started in the gut. Because when you can't absorb nutrients, it doesn't matter how, your diet can be as clean as pristine, and you can take all the right supplements and eat all the right things. But if you're not able to absorb the things that you need, the nutrients that you need, in order to produce the neurotransmitters, which are necessary for brain function, then your brain doesn't work right. So whenever your body is not working right, particularly the gastrointestinal tract, your brain is not going to work right. And we see this a lot, especially with children and adults diagnosed with autism. Almost universally, there are horrific gastrointestinal problems, and they start right after vaccination, oftentimes right after the MMR vaccine, but not always the MMR. It's a lot of it.
So is that there's obviously been a lot of people diagnosed with what they call irritable bowel syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to come up with explanations or can't explain things, so they just give them some generic sort of name for everything.
Yes. Well, something that I see, and I noticed this on one of the things I really hope that RFK is able to do in his new role is to stop the direct advertising to the public of pharmaceutical products, pharmaceutical drugs. But one thing that I noticed, I've been in this space for a long time. I was working not only as an activist and writing on the Vax Truth blog, but I was also still in the holistic private practice, working with families of children with autism and doing biomedical consulting and that kind of thing. And so I know that working on healing the gut is of paramount importance. In any chronic illness, you have to work to heal the gut. And it's really interesting to me, the doctors, pediatricians who still, at this point in time, say, oh, diet has nothing to do with it. Diet doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Don't listen to all of that. And then, the two things that are the most significant for so many children on the autism spectrum are gluten and casein, those big proteins. That gluten is the protein in wheat, and casein is the protein in cow's milk, and they're very hard to break down. There is the aluminum and the mercury and some of the other toxins in vaccines. They deactivate the enzyme that is necessary to break down gluten and casein. So DPP4 is deactivated. So those proteins then, they break down and they go through or they don't break down and they get into the bloodstream, and they're misidentified as endogenous opiates, which has a lot to do with why, kids with autism and kids diagnosed with ADHD, they look like little rapid cycler bipolar kids, because they're eating, they get up in the morning and they eat cereal and milk for breakfast. So they're getting gluten and casein for breakfast. And then they go to school and they're a little bit spacey for a few hours, and then they start twitching and they start, irritating their neighbors, and they look like little druggies because they're jonesing for their next fix. So they go to lunch and they eat chicken nuggets with gluten, or French fries that have gluten in them, or they have a chocolate milkshake, or they have their milk and stuff. So they get out their macaroni and cheese or their pizza, so they've got their gluten and casein, and then they're kind of out of it again for a couple more hours, and then they start twitching again about 2:30, and then they go home and they get into the cookies and milk or the leftover pizza, and it's all day long, this up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's the opiate effect, because the vaccines have whacked out their DPP4, their immune systems have been skewed, they've had all kinds of antibiotics, they've got yeast overgrowth, and they're producing their own alcohol from yeast, and then they're getting this opiate effect. And then they grow up and they get to be teenagers, and somebody hands them a beer or a pill at a party, and all of a sudden they're an addict. No, they're not. They've been an addict since they were 3.
Wow.
So it's really interesting to watch this. And so you see these, with this ulcerative colitis and these autoimmune diseases, the advertisements, which I don't think you guys get in Australia. I know in New Zealand and United States, I think, are the only 2 countries that allow this. But in the commercials, they'll show these people taking the medication, and invariably they're eating pizza or they're having ice cream. It's gluten and casein. It's like, take this pill and you can eat anything you want. So they create the problems and then they sell the solutions. It's the perfect business model.
Marcella, is there any vaccine at all on the vaccine schedule for children that you think is worth having?
No, without hesitation, no. The only one that there are some people who have horses and cows who are, they live on farms, and their children are, and they themselves are around large animals, which is where tetanus comes from, who do have, more of a legitimate concern about tetanus than somebody like, for example, who, cuts their finger in their kitchen sink on a broken glass and goes to the hospital and they say, oh, you need a tetanus shot. No, you don't. But, so if somebody is in an environment where tetanus is more likely, I do have some friends who are vaccine safety advocates who have vaccinated their children against tetanus. But you can't just, like I said, you can't just get a tetanus shot. It's Tdap or DTaP or DT, which still has mercury in it. So, and there are, I wrote an article on my Substack. I do have a Marcella Piper-Terry on Substack. And there's an article on there about tetanus. The World Health Organization does not recommend tetanus boosters every 10 years. The United States recommends every 10 years. World Health Organization says every 30 years. There are, there are a couple of published medical literature articles in that write-up on my Substack showing that in people who do get tetanus, high dose vitamin C is very, very effective. So I think, with any of the vaccines, the risks outweigh the benefits. And even if we had the problem with making a true risk benefit analysis is that we don't have the data to make those informed choices because they've never done the safety studies. So it's a crapshoot. And I would say that, I am at this point in time, having been in this for as long as I have been, I am extremely comfortable saying, my grandchildren will never get a vaccine, period. And that they will be, they are healthy, they are happy, they are brilliant, they are strong. And we know how to treat these things. We know how to treat measles with vitamin C and vitamin A. Vitamin A deficiency is the issue with measles. That's when you get secondary infections. Vitamin C, high dose vitamin C for whooping cough, even with varicella, L-lysine, and they're different, there's all kinds of remedies that can be used very effectively against these childhood infections. They are not diseases, they are childhood infections. And when a child goes through them, they strengthen their immunity and they have long-term broad spectrum immunity, not just against, like, for example, with measles. When you get measles and you get over it, it not only gives you immunity to measles, it also gives you immunity to all kinds of other things that are similar in their makeup to measles. And some of those things are associated with cancers. You know, I mean, having measles and getting through it reduces your risk later in life, risk of cancer, especially bone cancers, brain cancers, breast cancer. Chickenpox is associated with a reduced risk of testicular cancer and ovarian cancer in women. So, you know, brain cancers and the leukemia and lymphoma in children are some of the things that measles helped to strengthen the immune system and prevent the incidence of these things. And so now we've got epidemics of lymphoma and leukemia and brain cancers in children because we're denying them the ability to strengthen their immune systems by going through childhood infections at the time when they are supposed to go through them.
It's so simple, isn't it?
It really is. It's God's design. It's a beautiful design that man has just completely mucked up.
Marcella, there's obviously going to be change with RFK Jr. There's no question about that. It's just a matter of his approach, I suppose, whether he comes in with a sledgehammer or not. But do you think now that the overarching management of health in the US being very sympathetic to what you're speaking so about with such common sense, do you think that there's a lot of practitioners out there that'll now say, well, we've always thought that, but you know that wasn't the government thinking. We'll jump ship?
That's a really good question. You know, one thing that I've had a hard time understanding as a parent. So as a parent, I didn't see what was happening in my child because of my own upbringing to respect doctors and my own education that said, you know, this is this, this is this, this is this. So it took me a while to realize. I was very slow to understand what was happening with my own child. However, when you are what I don't understand is a pediatrician who, the average pediatrician in the United States has 1,500 patients in their practice. And autism now, the CDC number for autism, which is an old number gathered in 2020 on then 8-year-olds. So the number 1 in 36 that they say currently affects children in the United States is a vast underestimate of the true issue. So if you think about, you know, how many times out of 1,500, and that's a static number. So you've got 1,500 kids coming in, moving out, and it's, I mean, how many tens of thousands of children over the course of a 20 or 30-year career does a pediatrician see? And how many times have they watched this happen? And have they said, oh no, there's no connection. There's no connection. There's no connection. It can't be. It's not that. It can't be. How many times how many times I don't have scientific proof that when lightning strikes and I hear thunder, that those two things are connected. But I've experienced it enough times to put 2 and 2 together, to know that when that happens and that happens, there's a connection. How in the world does a pediatrician who has seen 30,000 children, you know, come through their practice and seen this happen over and over and over again, how do they not understand what's going on here? So when, you know, when the paradigm shifts after RFK gets in, and I think he's probably going to take the sledgehammer approach, because he's been in this long enough to know that every day that goes by means more harm to children. So I don't think he's going to pussyfoot around. I don't think he's going to I don't think he's going to, have a 5-year plan or anything like that. I think he's going to get in and he's going to make change, and it's going to be big change. And I just can't imagine how these pediatricians, it's going to come down to money. Paul Thomas, he's a pediatrician in the United States. I don't know if you guys are aware of him there, but Dr. Paul Thomas, he did a video for Children's Health Defense a while back. But and he's talking about the, hundreds of thousands of dollars that pediatricians make by having a certain segment, a percentage of their population, their patient population, fully vaccinated according to the CDC schedule by the age of 2. And that includes yearly flu shots and now the COVID shots, which are starting at 6 months. So it's, those who can step back and acknowledge the harm that they've done are going to have, I think, a real dark night of the soul. And they should.
We can only hope.
Mm-hmm.
Can only hope. One of the big things that's excited me, I've just spent 3 or 4 days in Melbourne mixing with a bunch of people at a conference that was set up by Australians for Science and Freedom, and it was incredible. The people there were amazing people, and I attended every lecture and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But it really appears now that there is an emerging awakening of our eagerness to get into the integrative medicine space, alternative medicine space. So I don't like using the term alternative, like, some people say we're alternative media. We're not, we're media. But
right.
To see the growing number of people who've been striving for this to happen for years, Johnny, for decades, to see them now bubbling and saying, wow, we might be actually getting somewhere. It's kind of like COVID has spurred on this desire for people to say, well, hang on, we shouldn't be relying on big pharma to solve our problems. They're only creating our problems. And
right.
And so it was really uplifting. And for example, there is a group there who are looking very closely at developing a home test kit to test your vitamin D3 levels. So you can do it at home, because in Australia it's very difficult to get your vitamin D3 levels checked through labs in Australia, because it's funded into oblivion. But as a side effect of that, my wife and I were fortunate enough to spend about 8 or 9 days with Dr. Paul Marrick in New Zealand. We toured with him and spoke with him. And he was taking 20,000 international units of vitamin D3 every day. He said, look, the one thing I've noticed in critical care, and he was agreed with by Professor Angus Dalgleish, the one thing we know in the pathology from people who die from cancer is they all seem to have very low vitamin D3 levels.
Right.
And so we thought that was worthy of us getting into. Now, Johnny, a whole year's supply of that amount of vitamin D3 is less than $100 for a whole year. I mean, health departments, if they're interested in health, should be farming this stuff out to every individual and making test kits available so we could monitor our own D3. But here's the catch. Since we got back from New Zealand about, I don't know, nearly 6 weeks ago now, ever since my wife and I have been married, I've always noticed every time she brushes her hair, there's always strands of hair all over the bathroom floor and all that sort of stuff. And yet she doesn't seem to have thinning hair, but there's always hair on the floor. And she's had a lot of problem with her nails and having healthy nails. And she was getting a bit bereft by all of that. But ever since she's been on the vitamin D3, the hair's stopped falling out and the nails have really improved in health. So there's so much more for us to unpack in all of this stuff. And I think it's kind of like we're going through what we need to go through in order to kick big pharma to the curb and really take responsibility for our health. And I think it appears to me that that's what RFK is going to be pushing us to do. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And I think, the responsibility is a big part of it. We've been socialized to and brainwashed to expect immediate results. take this pill and this is going to happen. And that it's when you're talking about reversing a state of chronic inflammation, for example, or illness, it doesn't happen that way. Your body will correct and will heal, but it's a slower process. And so I think that's one of the hurdles that we have to get over with expectations of patients. And doctors have said for years that part of the problem with over prescription of antibiotics, for example, is people go into the doctor's office and they're sick, and doctors know, this is a viral thing. Antibiotics won't do anything for that, and in many cases they'll make it worse. But they'll give them a course of antibiotics because that's what the patient expects. They want something. They want something from the doctor. So I think the responsibility and the shifting of our expectations to see this as not a quick fix, that nothing is going to be a quick fix as far as our health goes. Diet, supplements, D3, you talk about things, vitamin B6 and magnesium. Those two, B6 and magnesium, are huge for kids on the autism spectrum and kids with ADHD. And zinc, zinc, almost everyone is deficient in zinc. So when you're talking about D3, there's this interaction that happens with D3. The calcium, magnesium, zinc, and elemental lithium are all very protective against toxins and heavy metals, but they have to work together. So D3 helps pull calcium in and helps to regulate that ratio between calcium, magnesium, and zinc. And it's very protective. But it's people, and when you tell people that, they're like, wow, how do you know that stuff? But it really is something that this is a blessing to me, that I didn't have a prescription pad. I had to figure out things. I had to figure out functional nutrition. I had to figure out hair analysis and the methylation pathway, and how to kick in, help a child's methylation pathway start working, and plugging in different supplements and different vitamins and things, and making these dietary changes. And it's not an easy process. It's a long-term thing. But oh my gosh, when you have, there's one young man that I've been working with now for about 2 years with his family, and he was completely nonverbal and very, very sick on a feeding tube, horrible bone loss. And we've been working consistently, not doing anything with a sledgehammer, doing it with nuance. And, within about 6 months of working together, he said, "I love you" to his mom for the first time ever at the age of 16. So, there's a belief among people that you have to get, especially kids on the autism spectrum, you have to get them early. And if you don't get into that critical window, that there's nothing that can be done. And that's absolutely not true. It doesn't mean necessarily that they'll lose their diagnosis or that they will experience a full recovery, because, there was an analogy, I think Stan Kurtz may have been the one that said it, that, if you've been hit by a bus, you can go through you can go through the healing process. You can go through physical therapy, occupational therapy. You may be able to recover to the level where nobody would ever know that you'd been hit by a bus, but you've still been hit by a bus. And that's how it is with vaccine injury. There is a great amount of healing that can happen, but it is something that is multifactorial. It comes in, everything has to be dealt with. It's not just vaccines, it's environmental toxins, it's cleaning fluids and chemicals and air fresheners and what's being sprayed in the sky and what's in our food. It's all of those things. So the more changes we can make on a synergistic level, the better off we're all going to be.
Final question, Johnny?
Well, I think they're very positive times ahead, but I suppose a lot of people will be wondering, with the likely and hopeful possible changes as a result of bureaucracies changing around the world, how do we repair those that are injured? How do we
Another good question.
Yeah. Well, again, they've been hit by a bus. And Dr. Peter McCullough has developed a protocol, so specifically for COVID shots and the COVID damage. Peter McCullough is of the belief, and I have tremendous respect for him, that the spike protein is the number one issue to target. Things like curcumin and what is the bromelain and nattokinase, so enzymes that break down, and the nattokinase and bromelain that break down the spike protein, and curcumin, which lowers inflammation. That's his triad of his spike protein detox protocol, which I think is very sound. There is also a researcher named Doris Lowe, LOH. She is a brilliant researcher who has done a lot of work with melatonin and ascorbic acid. And she talks about the tale of two receptors. There's a CD147 receptor on the erythrocytes, which are the red blood cells, where the spike protein binds. And the combination of melatonin, high dose melatonin, and ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C, high dose ascorbic acid, prevents it prevents the spike protein from being able to attach to those receptor sites. And that is very important for people with blood clots and reducing the clotting factor of the COVID shots. So those are a couple of things, but anything that people can do to reduce their overall level of inflammation is going to be beneficial. Get vitamin D in the sun, get out in the sun and expose as much of your body as possible for 20 minutes every day. That's huge. Exercise, sauna, sweating is very, very important for detoxifying for all of us. Cleaning up your diet, eat organic as much as possible, and stay away from glyphosate, stay away from, the GMOs, stay away from anything that is GMO. I would say stay away from grains, period. Grains are inflammatory. We're not really supposed to eat them. Buy local, get your meats and your chicken and your protein sources from local sources and not from big box stores. Just as clean as possible, and try not to be obsessive, which is really hard to do. Nothing is ever going to be perfect. And the more we try to be perfect, sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot because we get upset when we're not perfect. And then that elevates our stress. So lowering stress levels, meditation, prayer, good sleep, all of those things are extremely important. Psychoneuroimmunology, mind, body, spirit, all of it.
What about red wine?
Red wine's actually pretty good. Unless you have a lot of yeast in your gut, and then it's not good.
Any other?
There are a lot of people now.
Chocolate?
Chocolate, yes, dark chocolate, 85%. Yes, dark chocolate.
That tastes
Very
like
much.
garbage, though. 85% dark chocolate. It tastes like eating.
Oh, you get used to it. You get used to it. It's good stuff.
Have it with the
Bee pollen is another really good thing. What was that?
Dip it in the wine.
Dip it in the wine. Absolutely. Dark chocolate and red wine are perfect together. Yeah.
So my last question is, how are you reading the mood in the USA at the moment?
Oh, well, it's dichotomous. There are those who are elated and cannot wipe a smile off of their face, and there are those who are trying to figure out how to leave the USA because they're terrified. And, it's I am not a fan of Trump. And I've been very open about that. That I've gotten a lot of flack for that, actually. Not really a fan, but definitely, after the Biden administration and the lockdowns, I'm still not happy that Trump has not taken responsibility for Operation Warp Speed. He's still very proud of that. He's not said anything about about the harm, not acknowledged that at all, and that doesn't surprise me. From my perspective on him. But as my friends on the opposite side of the aisle would say, or we're not on the opposite side anymore. I was a lifelong Democrat, but not anymore, and not for the last several years. I was an independent. I am an independent, and I was really wanting to vote for RFK, and I actually did. In the state of Arkansas, he was still on the ballot, and so I cast my vote for him for president. And I knew that I could do that without worrying about Harris, because Trump won Arkansas by 30 plus percentage points. So I knew it wasn't going to matter. But I got to vote my conscience, and that mattered to me. I have a lot of friends who I have friends on both sides. I must say that my friends who voted for Trump and who were Trump supporters have been far less angry at the other side. My friends who are liberal and were voted Democrat, and who felt like, Harris was the only hope for the future. Some of them are really, really hurting. And I understand that. I do, because those are their fears. That's their reality. It's not mine, but it's not my job to discount their reality. And I care. These are people I care about, and I don't want to, I want to be supportive of them. Someone said to me the other day, and this was kind of funny. She was a very avid Trump supporter, and I was talking to her about someone else that I care about very much, who was extremely upset about the outcome of the election. And she just tossed it off as, well, that's Trump derangement syndrome. And, it just did not sit well with me. I lost sleep over it that night. And I was just like, you don't know this person. You don't know their reality. You don't know their history. You don't know their fears.
Yep.
And for me, and I did talk to her about it afterwards. And I said, for me, and from my perspective, Trump derangement syndrome goes both ways. It can be also people who cannot see any of his faults, and can't, as a woman, it's very hard for me to accept his behavior in many ways. So, I am glad that he won the election, because Bobby Kennedy is where he needs to be. And that for me, it wasn't a one issue election. And that issue is the health of our children.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. Actually, I think warp speed will never be conceded by Trump as a mistake, because there's one development of character that he seems to have missed out on, and that's being able to manage his ego, and that really worries me. That really worries me. But I'm more elated that someone is prepared to come out in the health space in the USA, like RFK, and say, whatever you do, if you work for the CDC or the FDA, don't go destroying evidence, and get your bags packed. You're out of here. I mean, that's right. The sort of rhetoric that we're all searching for. I heard that and I puddled up. I thought, go, you just go. And I'm just praying like mad that we don't see another Kennedy assassination out of all of this, because the entanglement of big pharma in these cartels that are going on around the world, the criminality of these organizations can't be underestimated. And so we're actually trying. I just put a message through to Asim Malhotra, John, and hoping that he'll come on and talk about his plans for the USA, because he's signed up to be with Bobby Kennedy in all of this. Look, I think your assessment was spot on. I'm glad Harris didn't win for obvious reasons, because, I mean, right. How far down that road can you go? But let's hope that the cool heads will prevail. That's all we can say.
I agree with you completely. Yes, I hope so. And praying, absolutely praying for the safety of both Bobby Kennedy and President Trump.
Absolutely, because nobody wins when that sort of stuff goes down the pike.
Right.
Well, we might bring this to a close with a prayer if you're happy.
Absolutely. Please.
Dear Lord Father in heaven, we thank you for Marcella and her intellect and her integrity and her fearless approach to everything she's done in the last 2 decades, Lord, balanced by good research. And Lord, we see the benefits when we see uncensored science, because science ceases to exist in censorship. So we just pray for the light of truth, that all things may be examined under that light. And as a result, people will heal, that nations will heal, that families will heal and communities will heal, and that people afflicted by a disaster that has been afoot for decades now will be able to put things right, because you are in their life and you're guiding and leading them. We pray that you will inspire those legislators who need to admit to their failings and apologise to the people and start working on the healing of others rather than the protection of themselves. We do this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Johnny, you've often been heard to say,
You just couldn't make this stuff up.
you couldn't make this stuff up. Stay out of the trees, everybody. Don't forget, if you love somebody and you haven't told them, for goodness sake, get on the phone and call them. It's vitally important. There's a lot of anxiety and stress out there. And all I can say is, Marcella Piper-Terry, it's been an absolute pleasure. And we don't want this to be the last interview. We're sure there's going to be some development stateside that you might be able to enlighten us on. And we thank you so much for your courage and your willingness to be heard.
Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. Thank you so much.
God bless you, and God bless America, and God bless Australia, because we all need it. Okay, and we'll see you next time on Club Grubbery with some more great interviews. Thank you for watching. Keep sharing this stuff, and bye for now.